Hi class, this is Dr. Kaufman and I'm here to give you your week 1 lecture for CNL 500. Now I know that we're taking this class online, but I really feel that for classes where I have these PowerPoints available from teaching in the classroom, it's really an awesome opportunity for me to pass on information and talk with you briefly about the kinds of things that I would be giving you every week during our 4 hours in the classroom if you were here in Phoenix, Arizona, taking this class for your GCU master's degree. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to have 2 mini lectures put together. I'm going to push through them sort of almost Pechacucha style. So instead of spending 4 hours making this video, I really hope that it's more like 30 minutes, but that's going to mean that we don't linger on any slides. So let's go ahead and get started. So first off, welcome to the class. If we were in class together, we'd go around the room. I'd introduce myself to everyone, talk a little bit about my philosophy of counseling and my passion for teaching theories. And I really do have a passion for this course. It's a really important one. It's the very first course I took in my master's program all those years ago. I really like a lot of theories at this point now. The ones that I use with clients are probably a blend of solution-focused counseling with cognitive behavioral therapy for clients who are maybe a bit more problem-focused in that moment. And I've also added a lot of narrative work and mindfulness approach to my style as a counselor over the years as well. You may see at the bottom of the screen here, the Force will be with you always. That is a Star Wars reference, but it's also a counseling reference. At GCU, there's a research circle that I founded when I started teaching here that is called the Faculty of Online Research and Counselor Education. And we try to do 1 or 2 research projects every year related to counselor education, and we've named ourselves Force because that's our acronym. Also, I am a huge Star Wars fan. My dissertation was on a Star Wars video game, Star Wars The Old Republic, which is an MMORPG for those of you who know what those are. I'm sharing this with you so you get a little bit of a sense about who I am, how I connect to research and academia in the field of counseling, and also the clinical approach to working with clients and what theories I'm excited about. So for you, I want you to be thinking as you watch this lecture, what makes you want to be a professional mental health counselor? This first half of the lecture is really about what is the importance of theory? Why do I need to pick one? And I think that this is the first question you answered in your application to be in the program. You know, what are your goals as a professional mental health counselor once you finish the program? So I'm interested in knowing that too. And I think that you'll get more out of the topics in our course if you have that question up front in the center of your mind as you experience things. Now, for attendance in the online classroom, you're expected to earn a substantive post, which is the trophy icon next to your posts. I check every morning or afternoon. I go through everything that's been posted, and I make sure that they meet the qualifications for a substantive post, which means they have a substantial comment that's meaningful, it's important for understanding the topic, and it's a significant amount of contribution, which means it's at least 100 words. So if you have those 3 things, important, meaningful, and significant in length, then I will give you that trophy. And you need to earn one of those on 3 different days of the week. And that's the trade-off since you're doing this class online. That's how you earn your 20 participation points every week. As opposed to in the classroom, you would attend class and be there for the full 4 hours of classroom activity. We can't do that because we're doing this online. The weekly assignments are due by midnight on Wednesday every week. After that, you could experience a late point deduction, which is 10% per day late. I do modify that just a little bit, but I don't want to talk about that here because I think it is important to take those deadlines seriously and turn things in on time. And that's going to help you stay balanced and mentally well as you take these 8 weeks, because there is a writing assignment every single week in this course. And then the discussion questions, there are 2 of them every week. DQ1 is due by midnight at the end of Saturday, and DQ2 is due by midnight on the end of Monday. Those are both worth 5 points. And I'm not grading that the way that I grade the substantive post. I'm grading that based on how well you answered the question. I'm actually scoring it like it's an academic response. Also, you do lose 10% of that 5 points for every day that it's late too. So if you do DQ1 and you turn it on Sunday, instead of earning 5 points if it's a perfect response, you would earn 4.5 points. So that's a little bit about how the class works. For your writing assignments, I do expect that you use APA format expertly. So that means your title page needs to have a running head, and then the header for the rest of the pages needs to not be a running head. So you need to know how to do different headings for page 1 versus the rest of the document. For certain papers in this course, you are asked to include an abstract. You are also expected to include an introduction and a conclusion. The introduction should have a thesis statement. The body of your paper should have APA headings, well-formed paragraphs with research support in every paragraph. That research support needs to be additional resources, not just the required ones like the ACA Code of Ethics or the Nancy Murdoch textbook, Theories of Counseling and Psychotherapy. Those are good places to find information for this course and for our field, but they are required readings to be part of this program, and so they are not a sign of your personal research to understand the theory better. You do need to use the GCU library. You need to check that box for peer-reviewed sources. You need to find journal articles that are published in academically relevant and valid journals that explain how these theories or these clinical techniques work and help different populations, different people, different settings. And so for week 1, you're going to be looking up journal articles about psychoanalysis. And I know from my own research in the GCU library, there are lots of good resources. You can try to find historical resources, anything by Sigmund Freud that talks about it, or anyone who's reviewing discussion from Sigmund Freud almost 100 years ago or more. Those are good resources to find. Also, there's contemporary resources about modern psychoanalysis. Yes, it still exists. So I'm looking for those kinds of resources. Things that explore the role of the counselor, techniques you might use, application with clients similar to Anna. So think about the kinds of problems Anna is experiencing, and so forth. Multiculturalism, limitations, and risks of using this theoretical approach. Those are all good things to find journal articles about to use in your paper. And then, of course, the reference page needs to be hanging indent. It needs to be in APA style. The proper parts of the reference need to be regular font, italicized font. The right things need to be in parentheses. The punctuation needs to be correct, etc. And it needs to be cited like the kind of resource it is. So if it's a journal article that you find on a web page, do not cite it like it's a web page. Cite it like it's a journal article. Things like that. So I do pay a lot of attention to detail. Maybe that's the PhD inside me. But I think that that's one of the really important takeaways of doing a master's program in counseling is you do understand how to write. You can articulate yourself in terms of how you explain the human condition and the psychology of people, either by word of mouth or by written word. So that's the graduate school housekeeping. And let's talk about why theory is a good thing. Now, this is where I'm going to start to rapid fire the slides a little bit. This is discussion question 1. Please go to LoudCloud and fill it out before the end of Saturday night. And then also the textbook opens up with a nice little video that you can watch about Gone with the Wind. It explains the story of Scarlett and Rhett. And this is the famous movie line where Rhett turns around, looks at Scarlett after all the wrongs that he's experienced, and he's walking out and he says, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn." And he walks away, and we get the huge classic movie swelling of music, and we get Scarlett being devastated on the porch of her house. And this is a framework for having a counseling scenario throughout the entire course. So think about what is going on, read this square of text that I've taken from the textbook, and think about the interactions between those two characters if you're familiar with the movie and their history. And what would a counselor do for these two people in a counseling context using the theories that we are using week 1 through week 8. Now, Murdoch talks about what a theory is, and basically, a theory is something that has commentary about humanity from how they develop, how they experience problems, and how they achieve solutions to their problems. That's why we have theories. They're like a shortcut to understanding things more quickly in the counseling session. So it's like a roadmap for us as counselors to help the client work through their problem. Without a theory, we're kind of just sitting there listening and doing whatever, like throwing pasta against the wall and seeing if it sticks. It's not the best to do counseling without a theory, because then you don't have a list of interventions you use. You have no toolbox. You aren't trying to understand the client in a certain way. In this course, I want you to pay attention to all the theories, and when you read one in the textbook and start thinking about which one am I going to use for the paper this week. So this week you have to use psychoanalysis from Sigmund Freud, but in the future weeks you do have a little bit of a choice, and you're going to start to feel like this theory really feels good to me. Maybe it aligns with your personal philosophy or whatnot. And that's what they're intended to do. And so the APA, of course, comments on what psychotherapy is. And there's research always that talks about what exactly psychotherapy is. But our field is founded on psychological principles, on research, on therapist training and delivering professional services, and that we're always trying to understand the client as an individual, individualized problems, personalized experiences, and help them specifically with their direct complaint. And so when we apply a theory to that, it's a roadmap. Is this going to work? Yes or no? If it is working, how do we continue? If it's not working, what can we change? And then once there is no problem, the roadmap has led us to the end, and the client will terminate from counseling successfully. It's a shortcut to understanding them better. Now, another concept in our field is correlation versus causation. Now, on the left side of the PowerPoint, we have a picture of the Super Bowl. On the right side of the screen, we have an image about stopping domestic violence, alcoholism, and things of that nature. Now, if I told you that the Super Bowl causes an increase in domestic violence in our country, that is a correlational statement, but it's trying to be causal in nature. It's not actually correct. We would talk about this in class if you were in Phoenix with me. It's not causal because the increase in alcohol consumption amongst people watching the Super Bowl and the social appropriateness of drinking that much leads to an upswing in spousal and romantic partner arguments, and that leads to an increase in domestic violence. So the causation is actually an increase in drinking, and then the presence of intimate partner conflict. Those two factors together leads to an upswing in domestic violence. Not actually the Super Bowl, but it does happen during the Super Bowl because the Super Bowl gives people the right to do things differently in their mind. It's an irrationality. And so it's important to understand as a counselor, you're going to hear lots of people tell you how their life works. And it's important to understand using your theory what the difference is between two factors happening at the same time randomly and two factors happening because one is causing the other to occur. And so, does psychotherapy work? This is a question that Hans Eysenck in 1952 wanted to answer, and he really did not want to answer in the affirmative, apparently. He did research that identified that untreated people actually improve more often than treated people. So, of course, since then, our field still exists. That was over 70 years ago now. And, of course, psychotherapy is effective. But this is one of those initial studies that brings to the point that we need to understand the effect size and the zone of desired effect. So what's the effect score? You're going to look at an effect score as a number, usually a decimal point, because it doesn't usually hit 1.0. It's a decimal point between 0 and 1.0. Think of it like a percentage, actually. And this is how often these factors interact with each other to result in the desired effect. So if counseling and psychotherapy is effective 80% of the time, the effect score would be 0.80, right, over the non-treatment group. So The meta-analysis for psychotherapy has become much more effective since Hans Eysenck attempted to publish work to say it doesn't actually work. But it's, we're always looking at the effectiveness of our work. Here's discussion question 2. Please make sure to go into LoudCloud and answer this before the end of Monday night. That will be very good for you. And then also, there are factors in counseling that explain why psychotherapy is effective or is not effective. And the most important factor that we found in research is not anything you're going to do. It's not the theory that you use. It's actually the client's own life and the client's own experience. You don't have control over that at all. You actually only have control over how you decide to interact with your client and build rapport, so you'll see 30% there. And you have control over your clinical techniques and your theory and the things that you do in the session or ask the client to do in session. So if you add those two things together, it's 45%. But if you add randomness into it, 15% of whether the client gets better is, do they expect to get better? I'm going to counseling, so I'm going to get better. Or maybe just a placebo effect. Nothing you did. It's just the randomness of being part of the counseling process and they got better. So if you add that randomness with their own client experience, then that's 55%. So more than half of this is factored into things that you do not have control over. That being said, you need to do good professional work and strive to do so. The techniques you use are important, and the way you interact with your client is more important than anything else that you have control over. Develop that rapport, build that trust, show that you care and you're interested, and that's the best that you can do at the beginning stages of counseling. Now, if we were in the classroom, we would take the time to watch this interpersonal therapy role transition case. It's a 6-minute video, and I have included the URL here. If you'd like to pause this lecture and go watch that video, then you'll have some more context. But answer the following questions. What did you notice the counselor doing in the session? This is a really basic introductory kind of conversation. Did anything surprise you? And what % of what you think you could do in a counseling session right now? I know that you're new to the program, but right now, if I put you in a role play, would you be 50% similar to that conversation? 90% similar? Can you replicate what you just watched in that video? These are the kinds of things you want to be capable of doing as you move through the rest of this course. So this would actually be a classroom activity that we do. Now, people go to counseling for a lot of different reasons, but research has identified that there's 4 basic reasons. Because they're experiencing grief, because they're experiencing a role dispute, because something in their life is transitioning, or because they are lacking some kind of personal skill. Those are the things we're trying to help our clients work through. In a nutshell, we're also looking at diagnostics and things like that from the DSM-5 and, billing insurance for mental health disorders. But if we want to take all of that out and say, what are we actually helping our client with? It's those 4 things. Work through grief, overcome a dispute with someone, move through a transition in life, develop a personal skill, or overcome a deficit. Now, this is a breakdown of what the stages of therapy really are, and this is assuming that a client will stick with you from somewhere between 1 to 16 sessions. That's a really healthy estimate. I found that a lot of people terminate between 6 and 10 sessions unless they have a really good funding source or a structured program that they're a part of. And so you want to have stages of therapy. You want to explain this to your client. The beginning is getting to understand them. The middle is about focusing down on a problem, breaking it into something that's achievable, developing those skills, overcoming situations. And then there's the wrap up, 1 or 2 sessions to say, this is where we're going to stop, and you can always resume if you need me. And you want to also be connecting the dots for them. You want them to be able to overcome that problem in the future on their own. You want them to develop the skills so that they don't have to come to counseling every time there's an interpersonal problem that pops up. And so I've put a little Yoda image here of connecting the dots. I just think that it's really good to think about every little dot there as a little topic the client might bring up, but you're helping them connect everything together so they see the full picture by the time they're ready to terminate. It's a nice metaphor for what we do. And then you also want to practice your counseling skills that maybe don't belong specific to a theory, but they are skills that you would use no matter which theory. These are called micro skills if you want to find them in the research. But I've put also the cycle of the different things that we do in a counseling session. And I've also put a chart of skills that you may want to pause this slide and take some notes and begin understanding what all these skills are. So there's a difference between interpreting things and reflecting. There's a difference between giving feedback or deciding to probe the client for more information. There's a difference between supporting them and checking if you're understanding what their perception is more accurately. So you want to understand both the cycle on the left and the skills on the right side of the PowerPoint. And then Martin Seligman also published some research about the effectiveness of different kinds of elements of counseling. So is it appropriate to do control groups in therapy? Does the session limit have an impact on how well the client can transition back into the real world? Do we need to have treatment manuals that say this is what you do during session 1, this is what you do during session 2? And basically, it is good to have these scientific elements to our research, and, treatment's effective. So that's a good publication for us to have in our field supporting what we do. And here's another list of common factors. You can pause here and just familiarize yourself with support factors, which are the factors that the client has in their life that support them when they exit the therapy room. There's learning factors. These are the things that help them to develop new concepts in their mind. And there's action factors. These are like the behaviors and taking things into practice that will help them to overcome their problems. These are the things that the client should have in their life going for them as they engage in the counseling process. And here's a little opportunity for me to share a bit of myself. The philosophy lesson here, Occam's razor, is sort of the simplest approach to answering a thing is the approach that you should take. So on the right side of the screen, you have a Science-y man cartoon, and that whole apparatus connected to his forehead is a napkin, right? Or he could just pick up the napkin and use it. And so Occam's razor would say that contraption is a terrible monstrosity of human use of energy. Because it goes far beyond the need to use a napkin, and it overcomplicates. Theories should not overcomplicate. They should bring clarity and simplicity to understanding what we are trying to do in the therapy process with our client. So that's your Philosophy 101 meets CNL 500 with Dr. Kaufman for the day. You're welcome. All right, so now the next slide is stimulation and practicality. A good theory will be useful, and it will not head the client down the path of understanding useless jargon. It should be something the client and therapist together can utilize. It should be research supported and confirmed to be valid. It should understand its limits. So in the paper this week, you're going to talk about the risks of using psychoanalysis. That's important always when you publish a research article. If you become an academic writer, you're always going to include a section, limitations of the study, known risks or potential risks, areas of future research moving forward for the field. And then also a theory should be aware of if it's inspiring professional fads. So there are certain theories that rise in popularity and wane a bit as the years move forward. I would say right now, mindfulness is a really powerful theory. It's something lots of researchers are excited by and interested to find its application with all the different clinical problems. So you could say it's a fad, but it's a legitimate set of theories and a specific approach as well. So fad is not a detrimental word here. It just means that the theory is at high popularity right now in the field, across conference presentations and things of that nature. Another thing that you will want to do is to understand who comes to counseling. And this is why we must do valid academic research in our writing assignments. This is why we must understand APA format and the ACA Code of Ethics. This is why we must actually read the textbook every week before we start doing anything. Before we start writing our answers to the DQs, we must read the textbook, the required readings, the journal articles that the GCU curriculum team passed our way. Because a client is not going to go to counseling if their own ideas were enough to overcome a problem and make them feel comfortable. A client is not going to come to counseling if, when they talked with their friends and family, those ideas were good enough for them to feel comfortable and overcome their problem. A client is not going to come to counseling if they have knowledgeable acquaintances. Maybe they have a friend who's a social worker or who's a psychologist, or maybe a college friend who's a medical doctor now, or a pastor, or maybe they have a sponsor from a meeting that they attend. They have a knowledgeable acquaintance in their life who they trust their wisdom. If that wisdom is enough, or maybe just their friend is good at a smartphone and they looked up on Psychology Today, hey, did you try this? This is why we can't just use websites to be a good professional counselor, because the whole world has access to websites. Your goal is to be able to read scholarly, well-researched, statistically supported content, understand it, and apply it in your work with clients. And so you won't get credit in this course for using websites in your papers, because everyone can find that. You really need to use peer-reviewed research journals and show that you can read them and understand the implications of those findings, because the client has already exhausted Google, their own ideas, friends and family, the concepts that knowledgeable acquaintances can give them. If all of those didn't work, then they come to counseling to meet you. So your ideas need to be better than all of those ideas. This is the most important part of this first lecture of week 1. I really hope that you are listening up to this point and that you understand what I'm saying here. This is why we include scholarly peer-reviewed research in our writing in this program. It's not just because APA is important and we have to support it as an academic institution. That's not it at all. It's because if you read journal articles and understand them and can use them in your writings, then I know as your professor for this course that you're hitting the top of that pyramid. You're trying to be better as a resource for your future clients than just a knowledgeable acquaintance, than just their friends and family, and just themselves. You're trying to give them information that they can't find without you. And that's why we do what we do in this master's program. So here is a quiz. I really want everyone to pause what you're doing. Pause this slide after you're done listening to explain this, and go to this website, the https://www.odu.edu/ and then the rest of the HTML address. Enable Flash on your web page and then do this quiz. This quiz is going to answer your question of what theories do I line up with right now. It's going to ask you a lot of questions on a scale of 1 to 10, and you just have to answer what's important and what's not. And it will give you a breakdown of what theories you align with the way you believe humans work right now. This is my set of results from a couple years ago when I started working as a clinical supervisor. I decided to take this again. I've known about this since my times as a beginning doc student. This is when I first took it. And so these are the scores that I earned several years ago, but I kept the screenshot. And what you'll see for me is my cognitive behavioral score is 93%, and the 4 theories included in this quiz are all very high. They're all over 90%. But there are other theories and other categories that I line up with really strongly, like person-centered counseling, narrative psychology. I also have pretty strong scores for everything except analytical psychology is in the 60%, but that's still pretty high. So you just want to understand what these theories are as best as you can here in week 1. And then when we actually study them in future weeks, that's going to be a great resource for you. So please take a screenshot of your results and keep it. And then maybe even take the quiz again at the end of the course and see if, after learning about these theories, if you're actually in a different spot. That could be a really good exercise for you. to do a pre-test and post-test for CNL 500 for your theory scores. And this is a really important question that I always ask myself. This is sort of a summary of why we do what we do and how we understand our clients. I ask myself, what would have had to happen to someone to make them think, feel, or behave the way that I'm seeing this client think, feel, or behave today? This is a way for me to develop empathy and concern and to create a broader sense of understanding my client. I think it's really important for us to develop empathy, step into their shoes, and think about their problem in this context. What would have had to happen for someone to become like this, to experience auditory hallucinations, to feel depressed and not get out of their house for the last 7 days except to come to this session, to drink so heavily, to gamble, to avoid their college classes and just game all night, to engage in risky behaviors or unhealthy health habits. What would have had to happen to push someone to be this way today? And if you ask yourself that, I think that your ability to connect with your clients and even to apply theory more appropriately, significantly accurate, will increase. So please remember this question. It's been a lifesaver for me my entire time in this field, even going back to my days in practicum. I just really grabbed onto this question in my first week doing live counseling with real clients, and I've never let go of this question. So that's a bit of personal wisdom, not really related to the content of the course, but I'm passing it to you since you're early in the program right now, like I was when I first started thinking about this question. And then here's a table from the textbook that explains the orientations over the years and how utilized they are. It goes all the way up to 2015, and it just lists the theories in terms of, you know, what most people would report they are. You're going to see really high numbers for some and low numbers for others, but it's important to understand what different counselors think they're doing in therapy. So here are the steps of what you're going to do during this course. You're going to look at each theory each week. You're going to ask yourself, you know, what is the core motive of human experience? What is health and dysfunction? That's step one. And then how does it apply to your client? Does the client fit with using this theory and the options and the clinical techniques that come from this theory? And then step three is, how do I assemble the puzzle? How do I actually do counseling with this theory? Okay, so that's what we're trying to accomplish here by reviewing week by week these different theories and clustering them into different groups. You also want to understand how to do these different theoretical techniques in an ethically sound way. This preamble comes directly from one of the opening pages of the ACA Code of Ethics. This, to me, lists the things that are just the bare minimum of understanding ethics. You need to understand this page, memorize this preamble. It is so important. You want to know the words at the bottom of this list: autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, justice, fidelity, veracity. You want to have that list memorized so that you can roll them off the tip of your tongue, know exactly what they mean. You want to also understand the core professional values 1 through 5, enhancing human development across the lifespan, honoring diversity, promoting social justice, safeguarding the integrity of the counseling relationship, and practicing in a competent and ethical manner. If anything you ever do in this field does not meet all 5 of those at the same time, you have to change what you're doing and course correct immediately. It is important to always hold on to all 5 of those. And you must do it in a way that supports the use of those 6 professional principles at the bottom. So that's where I fall on ethics. And if the theory, the way you're using it, doesn't support the use of all those concepts on the screen, you have to adjust. You have to adjust. You cannot accept doing counseling in a way that violates any of those principles. And so this is getting to the end of this first lecture. The next video that I plan to create for you this week is going to review the psychoanalysis chapter. So as we go through the course, this cycle going around the textbook. These are all the concepts that we're hoping to understand by the time that we wrap up our time in each week. So the theory that we select for our paper, we have to understand every box in that circle. And then if we've done that, then we understand the theory well enough to move on and continue with the next week of our master's course in counseling theories. So, that being said, the next video I create is going to start right here. It's going to be on Chapter 2, Psychoanalysis, the work of Sigmund Freud, and the establishment of the field of psychology and how psychoanalysis looks for us working with clients in a modern context. Thanks everyone for watching this video. I hope it was helpful, and I look forward to making more of these as we move through the rest of the course. Thanks everyone.